Good evening, Michiel. You're looking very dark.
Sorry, there is no other option here because I'm in the train. I just went in the train in Lviv. So I have only this very small light here next to me.
Yeah.
It's a lamp, you know.
Yeah.
We can read with it, but this Zoom meetings is something, you know, it's something new for this this train. Didn't experience so many Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm here.
You are here, yes, and I'm very grateful for that, Michiel. I call this news from the underground.
Yeah.
And maybe it looks a bit like underground now, and underground had very different meanings nowadays in Ukraine. So very welcome here. So
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce us now, and then we'll start. Okay.
Sure.
It's a bit strange because we are good friends. And it seems like we are strangers now in the way we are talking to each other, but that will definitely change. So welcome everyone with Don't Crave Up Ukraine. Again, our 9th live stream, and this is the good and bad news at the same time. The bad news is, of course, that we do this weekly, and it means that it's now war in Ukraine for 9 weeks. And it's a terrible war. Everybody has seen it, and we would have enjoyed it very much if it was already gone, but the future will be that we will meet again, probably not several times again in this live stream. And the good news is that from the start on February 24, we succeeded in getting interesting guests every time and again every week on this platform. So welcome again. So I'm here now with Michiel Driebergen. To tell the truth, Michiel Drieberger is a very good friend of mine. We know each other for some long time, and Michiel is a correspondent working in Ukraine, but not only in Ukraine, but he will tell us in a minute himself. We both of us, we worked on a book on Lviv, Lviv City of Paradoxes, and Michiel also wrote a book about Jews together with Helene Zorgeraar, who was here last week, Jews of Lviv. So, and we're going to talk under this what mysterious title, News from the Underground, on what it means to be a correspondent today in Ukraine, and how Michiel looks at his mission, as his profession, being there for so long time. And of course, also, what are your experience today and in the last weeks in Ukraine, but also maybe on the long term, because you have been there for so long time already. So, Michiel, would you be so kind to tell us a bit about yourself? Who is Michiel Driebergen?
Sure. Yes, I will do. Thank you, Ruud, for hosting me. So yes, I'm a correspondent. I'm working for media only in the Netherlands, so a radio and a newspaper mostly. I'm a freelancer, which means that I'm paid by every published word. Apart from that, there is no payment. So I need to get my articles published. That's the most important thing. I must say, for a journalist now in Ukraine, this is not the biggest problem, because there is lots of work. There is every day a deadline, or 2 or 3, last Wednesday, even 6. So it's a very busy time. There's lots of work. I'm doing this for 8 years now. So these circumstances, being in a train, talking to someone from the train, is also not new for me. I hope the connection will make it for some time, because when the train will start driving, we will see how long it will take. Because we will, I'm going now to Uzhgorod. It's in the south of the West, so to say. From there, I will go back to the Netherlands for a week, and then I will be back in Ukraine. So last months, I think I spent more time in Ukraine than in the Netherlands. Since November, I think it was almost full time working here. Of course, someone was coming. We knew that something was coming. But that this would happen, like what's happening now, is something which is really unexpected for me. I never believed in that this invasion would take place. I didn't believe it because, well, I'm working now for 8 years in this country since 2013, since the Maidan revolution. I've experienced the war. I know what war is, so to say. And actually, I think this is the main reason for me that I didn't believe that this war would take place, because I was always thinking when this invasion would be like the Americans were saying that it would be such a mess and such a bloody event and such a destruction. I just simply couldn't believe it. But it happened, and now we are in it. And how it will end, we don't know.
We don't know. And I think a lot of what you say, a lot of us share the same idea. It could, we know it could happen, but we didn't believe it would happen, so to say. And also where your last finishing words, like we don't know whether it will stop. That makes us a very difficult time to live in, so to say, and without this perspective, okay, like a football match, the whistle of the referee starts the match and the whistle of the referee stops the match, and you know where you're in, and now you don't know where you're in. It's like a totally unexpected environment, which you can hear. Yeah. So
yep.
If you would say something about this question I ask on every one of my guests. So how was the last week? So because we do this every week. If I ask you this question, then maybe you are very well positioned to say something about it, because I'm following you and reading what you're writing. So you're very close to the people where you were interested in. How was this week? How did you experience it?
It was another week of people with whom I met, who were telling me stories about death, actually. Not only destruction, not only fleeing places, escaping from places, escaping from death, but also death. Last night, I was in the night train, and a friend of mine from Kharkiv told me that a friend of hers was killed last day in Kharkiv. Yesterday, I wrote an article about a lady who escaped 3 weeks ago from Mariupol. And now her former classmate, she told me today, her former classmate escaped also today from Mariupol, but she had to leave behind her husband and her 2 young kids killed in Mariupol. She is still alive, but she didn't know. This is what this contact of me told me. She doesn't know actually if she's still happy that she is alive. And this is the experience which I have for, and I think many of you, for the last 2 months. So I was in Dnipro last week. So yesterday evening, I went back by train from Dnipro to Lviv. Dnipro is a frontline city, but Dnipro has some experience with being a frontline city. So since 2014, it has been sort of a frontline city in a cultural way, but also in the literary way. Like they know what it is to build checkpoints around the city. They know what it is to receive people fleeing from the war. So there are sandbags everywhere. The windows are taped, like to prevent the glass from flying around, so to say. There are block posts, like checkpoints. Still, the front line is 200 kilometers away. What is interesting, I think, Ruud, is to explain that Dnipro is, like I said, a frontline city more than Lviv. What I notice is that there is in both cities, to compare those 2 cities, Dnipro and Lviv, I think there is the same feeling of fear, and we don't know what to expect. At the same time, in Dnipro, I have this feeling that people are closer, and the closer you come to the front line, the more confident people are, so to say. In Lviv nowadays, there is a very abstract fear about what could possibly happen. But it's really hard for people in Lviv to understand what war is still. I know many people have been killed as soldiers, as military in the east, and there is, of course, experience with the war. But in Dnipro, people understand better how far it could come and what it is, war, which means that it's less abstract, of course, closer, so more like a threat. At the same time, people are more confident, like we will win this war. So it was for me, it's an interesting difference. And well, in Lviv, the war is still far away, although it came very close, of course, like 3 weeks ago, and last week with this second big attack on the city. For the first time, Russian missiles killed Lvivian civilians, which is, of course, a big shock for many, also for me.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Do you have any explanation, but why people in Dnipro are more confident, and especially confident in we will win? So, because this is remarkable. You can be confident in we can resist, or we are good prepared, or we know what will happen. But having this confidence in we will win this, where does it come from?
It's a good question, Ruud, because you would say, in case the Russians will occupy Donbass, then the next step literally is Dnipro. There is this city near the river. It's hard to say, but actually this experience is not new for me. The last 8 years, it was all the time like this, that the closer I was in Donbass, for example, near the front line, the more, again, people understood, okay, this is war. When artillery is being shot at us, we know what to do. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but I guess it's comparable when you know, for example, I don't know, when you have a bad neighbor, you know how to behave, how to, to keep him calm, to escape on the right moment, etc. It gives you at least, of course, these scares are very near, but at least it gives you the feeling that you know what to do. While Lviv, okay, there could be some bad neighbor in the very near future coming to you. What to do then? You don't know what to prepare for. Something like this.
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast what you were describing. And what's your idea? Are they right?
I really don't know. I really don't know. And I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not, because maybe there is also no other way. When the Russians are that close, I think it's the same experience what I see from stories from Odessa. Everyone knows that Odessa is on the target list of Russia, of Putin. Today it was actually again explained by the Russians that they are really targeting. I mean, they want to have the not only the east but especially the south. But what to do when you are not running away? You need to believe that victory from the Ukrainian perspective is possible.
Remember this about this. That is maybe a bit too dramatic to put it this way. Primo Levi wrote about this, how to survive these difficult circumstances. And then you need a kind of basic realism. So hope is killing you. That is what he says. But this confidence in there will be a next day and I can do some sensible today for a friend or a neighbor is something what kept him going, if I remember well. So this is I always was thinking about Odessa as and Ukraine as a country of cities. There's all these cities have these kind of different mood, so to say. Odessa, I thought you never can conquer Odessa. That was like me being told when I visited Odessa.
Yeah. Well, of course, I think in difficult circumstances you either run or you stay.
No.
And then you need to get hope from every spark of light, so to say. I think that there is also lots of hope. I mean, in the sense that Ukraine is now, it is a country of different cities, different regions.
Mm-hmm.
But it might sound as a cliche, I think, especially for Ukrainian viewers. But as an outsider, what I've never seen is so much unity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not romantic. It's a way of survival. Yeah. I have been escaping myself from east to west on the first day of the war.
Yes.
I was actually with a group of people who also evacuated with me. Among them, there were kids. But we have been taken in, welcomed on every place we were. At this very moment when no one knew what would happen, how fast the Russian tanks would go. So it was really something which I will remember all my life. My experience from this evacuation from east to west is not the war as such, but the solidarity and the friendship and the warmth of the people we met. So it's really something which is, again, I think it's not romantic. I think now many Ukrainians see themselves in a situation like, okay, I'm speaking Russian in Lviv. There might be some people who are having difficulties with it, and they are, I can tell you, but it doesn't lead to big conflicts. Although there is like a masses of people who are now, coming from somewhere far away and who are being received and being fed and being like transported further. It's really interesting to see how this is going.
Yeah. So if I may take you a couple of years back, so to say. So I think what you just mentioned, it was 8 years ago when you came to Ukraine. This must be 2014 during Maidan. Probably so.
Yeah, then I started working as a correspondent during the Maidan revolution. Before that, I was also working in Ukraine every now and then. But yes, since that time, yes.
Yeah, and since that time we know each other also. We met
exactly 14 years. The Maidan revolution. Yes.
But what brought you to Ukraine?
Well, I wanted to be a correspondent in the eastern part of Europe, so to say, the central eastern part of Europe. I was focusing on Poland because there was at that time much more, I think, to do for a correspondent. But actually, since the end of 2013, Ukraine was much more interesting than Poland, especially the first years. Of course, afterwards, Poland became more interesting because of peace and this government and so on. But Ukraine has been always more in progress, so to say. So this country changed a lot in the last 10 years. And for a journalist, it's just simply very, very interesting. There is lots of stories to tell. And Ukrainians are very open. Ukrainians are very friendly, and they always have a story. There is always some story to tell, so to say. It's not only because of the political events we've seen the last 10 years. It's also because of the people. I think Ukrainians are willing and eager to tell their story, and it's really, for a journalist, better to work here, I can tell you, than in Poland, for example, where people are a little bit more on a distance usually, and well, where let's say the big steps in history are not taken with such a speed like in Ukraine.
Yeah, is it not only it's what you say? Hey, I came there because it's really something happening there. Huh? That's basically where you're referring to 2014 or just a bit earlier. So it's a young country, huh? Considering that, of course, in Ukrainian historical narrative, it's much more older, but it became an independent nation in 1991. So in that sense, and became part of this willingness to be part of the democratic European, step by step, not by the beginning, I think, but step by step. So it's not only about there's happening a lot of people are open, but I think as a journalist, maybe it's also not about that they are willing to tell you something, but the subject about what you are telling to you something. Is that also what you brings to Ukraine, and especially what brings you coming back to Ukraine? Because so you are so a fellow traveler of Ukraine, so if I may say so.
Yeah. Well, of course, there is much to discuss with Ukrainians about what is Europe, for example. To what extent is Ukraine part of Europe? This is an important topic. So yes, it's and actually it became less important, I think, the last years. I think during Maidan, well, as you remember, it was all the time about what is Europe, what is being European. We remember the European flags on the square. I think there was disappointment afterwards from the Ukrainian side, but maybe also from the European side. Of course, you know, Ruud, about corruption. I've been writing about corruption also last years. It's not easy to remove it from a society, right? At the same time, the things which were happening and the people who were working on the struggle or the fight against corruption, they always had a very good story, but also like a very good motivation. And I think this motivation never left the people the last 8 years. I think the best people from the Maidan generation are still active. By the way, unfortunately, most of them are now active at some frontline. They are in their 30s now, and are using the weapons. And this is also very sad to see. I don't want to think about, these questions, about this, all these programs which were developed to fight against corruption or to make the government more transparent or to find good people for government institutions and so on. How these programs will ever, get started again. Will that ever be possible? I don't want to think about such questions because it was also part of my work. I've been writing about it. Well, it's also part of your work, Ruud, that people are now outside of the country. Many good people escaped from the country. The Maidan generation, this is people with children now. Well, children are not in the country anymore, right? Most children left. Mm-hmm. So the parents also left. I mean, the women, the mothers left. So these are questions for later, I guess.
The questions of today?
The questions of today, I think it's very well summarized by one of these people where I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about this Maidan generation. His name is Vladislav in Kiev, and he has been working on all these programs I just mentioned to fight corruption, but also to to create better circumstances for entrepreneurs and so on. Vlad is now defending Kiev. He is in the territorial defense forces. I asked him 3 weeks ago when I did an interview with him, why are you doing this? Well, he said, it's the survival of the country.
Yeah.
At the moment, I think it's not about building up something in whatever way we will use this, but it's about the survival of Ukraine, I think.
Yeah, the survival of Ukraine. That's what one of the things what struck me is, if I'm looking back as the 30 years of Ukraine, and yet 1991 and 2004, of course, the Orange Revolution, 2014, that's Maidan, and now 2022, of course. And in a certain sense, you can say that all these moments are about the creation of Ukraine as a nation, as an independent nation. So, and not a nation that is some abstracting in the sense that you have a flag and a national anthem and a constitution, but a nation that I think time after time, what struck me and what I see again now more than 2014 maybe, a nation that really means something for people, that's something what they carry in their heart, even more today. Would you agree to that?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I always think about these words of, but he is being quoted a lot, I think also nowadays, is Jaroslav Hrycak.
Mm-hmm.
I did an interview with Jaroslav last summer, 30 years of independence. This was the occasion for my newspaper. And I remember that he told me, well, Ukraine becomes united when there is a threat from the outside. He mentioned some moments. Of course, it was the Maidan revolution, but also before that, there was a moment, but I don't remember, I'm sorry, which moment it was, that Russia took already a part of Crimea 15 years before they annexed Crimea. And also this moment was a very scary moment for Ukraine. Compared to nowadays, it's just something small, right? But he mentioned this as an example. And he was already like, he was not predicting, of course, because no one, also Mr. Hrycak didn't predict this situation, but unity is a result, as I understand, if I may say so, unity in Ukraine is a result of the threat from the outside, by default, so to say, right? Mm-hmm. And this is what I'm thinking about very often, especially now. The nation, although the nation, a part of the nation, is now abroad, but of course the sense, the feeling of unity is very strong. Although much of it is connected to what we are not Russians. Yesterday, I met with the mayor of a small village near Dnipro. A guy from, let's say, the so-called Soviet generation, I think like 60 years old. And he said, well, before 24 of February, I had relatives in Russia. Now I don't have relatives anymore in Russia. And I asked him, but where are they? No, they are still there, but they are not my relatives anymore. For me, it's actually mostly painful to hear this. Because it's something, let's say, it's very tragic, of course, and it's a very negative emotion, a very understandable and very logical reaction, I think. Mm-hmm. Now there is some first attempts, as I can see in Ukraine, not only decommunization, but also de-Russification. There is now discussion starting about the removal of Pushkin, the writer, from his, let's say, from the cities and the towns. I know that in some places in Western Ukraine it already happened. Uzhgorod, for example, Ternopil. I really hope that there is a way, but I'm really someone who could not, let's say, judge about it, not at all. But I really hope that there is something. That there will be something left of this unity later on, so to say, when the war will be over, which is something, let's say, on the plus side, something positive, something which creates the identity of Ukraine, not only in what we are not, but to be able to describe what we are, so to say, together. So this is a big and also very interesting question for me when it's about identity, how this will develop the upcoming years. And again, I'm working for many years in Ukraine, but I really try to be humble, so to say, that I'm an outsider and I will follow this process, and I will really try not to judge how this should be or something.
Yeah. I remember that we discussed this already once. So if that brings me a bit like I saw you a couple of weeks ago. I don't know when. You were on Dutch television with other correspondents, and then I think the presenter said something to you as a war correspondent, and you said, "No, I'm not sure if I'm a war correspondent." So, what kind of correspondent are you?
Well, if let's say if war is a part of the work, then it's part of my work. But war is just one event of the many events which could take place in your work as a correspondent. So, I mean, I'm also writing about corruption, but I'm not a corruption correspondent, right? And now war, unfortunately, is a big part. It's the biggest part. It's the only part of the work. Mm-hmm. So all the other projects, all the other plans are now like for maybe later.
Yeah. So if I'm thinking about the war correspondents, I'm thinking about Martha Gelhorn and Ernest Hemmingway was a war correspondent. To mention a few, Marie Colvin was a war correspondent. Mm-hmm. They really wanted to be in the war, in witnessing the moment of the war and sharing it. And especially Martha Gelhorn was rather like had a mission in that. So I want to be a witness of this. So what do you say, that the monsters won't come away with it. So that I remember this very impressive words of hers. That's why she want to become a war correspondent. So, but if you, and I agree, you are, if I've read your work or hear you on radio, you are not in that sense a war correspondent, so I would say. So,
no, because I think that the names you mentioned, most of them, I think they were traveling to the wars in the world, yeah. Right?
Yes.
And there are some war correspondents now in Ukraine, and they are here for the first time because there is a war. Well, this is something I cannot understand. It's a very. By the way, we are leaving Lviv now. I don't know whether you can see it.
Yes, I see it.
But it's of course very romantic to go by train still in Ukraine. So in this sense, no, I'm not. I know what war is. Unfortunately, last years I've been experiencing a lot, and I've been in this, shelling and this. I know the sound of the war. I know about the results of the war, the consequences of it, but I'm not looking for it. And I also know that when the correspondents are, especially people who are not in the first place war correspondents, are looking too much for the war situations, then something will go wrong. So I will try to avoid, when it's part of the work, then it's okay for me to take risks and to be in these situations. But I really should know what and why and where. And that's the main thing.
Yeah. I remember you once told me that we were in Maidan, and Maidan was then violent, but we knew violent where that's on the hill, and then you once met a colleague of you, and he said, and with the Maidan we were in the square, and were speeches and so on, and he said to you, well, I'm going away, what's this boring, there's nothing going on here. And then you said something like, that's not something I don't understand, there's a lot going on here, so to say. So
yes.
I remember that. So if you think about that, maybe it's a difficult question, but I know you as someone who has an open or maybe a hidden mission as a correspondent. I read your books and I read your articles, and there is a kind of love in it, but a kind of very earnest interest in knowing the details, so to say, not being ideological. And I'm wondering if you would describe your mission as a journalist now in Ukraine, how would you describe that?
For me, I think my role, I see myself as just one person in the news stream, let's say, about Ukraine. For me, it's the most important thing that I'm reporting on Ukraine. I'm not reporting on Russia. So I always say to the people, my colleagues who are calling me, and they ask me like, what's in Putin's mind? And I'm telling them, really, I don't know. Ask my colleagues in Moscow. for me, the motivation to start to work in Ukraine was to tell the story of Ukrainians and to tell the story of Ukraine. There are enough others who are telling the story of Germans and about the story of Russians. And so as for the location, I'm trying to see the world, to watch the world, to report on the world from the Ukrainian point of view. Yeah. But Ukraine has very different faces and many different voices. So I'm trying to listen to all of them, which is not always easy, of course. But this is, I think you can call it a mission in this way that that I'm trying to report on what I see and what I hear in Ukraine, and not to lose myself in all kinds of geopolitical visions or ideas about what Turkey would do or what the Kremlin would say. Or so there are others who are doing this, and now I think it's good. Now I think it proves that it was a good idea to do that, because now we see that there are many different colleague journalists are coming here for the first time, and there are some misunderstandings, I think, about Ukraine, which I'm trying with a small platform, so to say, I'm working for, of course, but to avoid, so to say.
Yeah. But then, if I just this afternoon, I read your last 10, 15 articles. I'm not sure about that. And what struck me always is that you are looking for common people. So a psychologist, a doctor, a farmer, someone who is in the street, a priest, and if there is a general theme in your work, in what you are doing, is exactly looking there, so to say. So not very much. I saw some. Your interview with Marie, for instance, was with a prominent Ukrainian, but most of them are just regular people walking somewhere, walking the street. So is this by design? Is this, well, I should be there and not there? And not only because others are doing that, but maybe I'm pushing a bit to see what, but because to be honest, I think you're doing something quite unique in that. So very persistent. So you're giving voice to people who don't have a voice often, so to say.
Yeah. Well, it's also somehow, for me, it's very logical, because every, let's say, ordinary Ukrainian, if they are existing, so to say, they are very poetic, and they could explain what they think, and they always have a story. Ukrainians always have a story, and this story always has a beginning, has some road to the end of the story, which is logical, which is always well explained. Yesterday evening, I did an interview with a psychologist. Accidentally, she was a psychologist. She was escaping from Mariupol. Again, it was this lady. And I just asked her to describe what Mariupol was before it was destroyed. And she came up with a story like, walls and stones and streets. They are, let's say, they are the home of our memories. So she was remembering herself when she was going through the streets of Mariupol. She was remembering herself as a little girl, 30 years ago, walking through the same street. And then she mentioned Mariupol. This destroying of Mariupol is so bad. It's so horrible, because it's also the destroying of our memories. Of course, she is a psychologist. She's a lady who is able to express herself quite well, but for me, this is really Ukrainian. It's really something, it's a gift for a journalist that people are in general quite well able to explain in a very poetic way why they do what they do, and why they feel what they feel. And so it's just attractive. When you go to some intellectual like Marinovich, of course, I like to talk to him, and I like to speak to Mr. Jaroslav Hrycak. They are professors. It's their job to explain. But all Ukrainians are able to do it. I think much more than we in Western Europe are used to be poetic in our explanations, and especially in times of war, this is simply very attractive. And this war is about very common people who are trying to survive.
I'm very struck by what you say and how you experienced it, and how I perceive your work, your little texts in newspapers and so on, is you're acting like a microscope, so to say. You're putting some light, some spot on one lady, man, priest, or just what we talked about, and then you gave them a voice. Maybe you gave the world more than you basically are looking for, so to say. That's really what's on my mind. So that's why I think your work is so immensely impossible, so immensely important in that sense, because you give all these voices. If we could back 10 years to your pieces of work, we could get a huge kaleidoscope of what Ukraine actually is. So if you are looking for an identity of Ukraine, it's there. You will find it there, so to say. So if your psychologist, I read a piece today, is talking about Mariupol. So being a nation is being in memory, so to say. That's
yes.
I really experienced this as a gift of you to us. So
thank you, Ruud. Well, it's just a way, I hope, to make Ukraine closer to us, to Netherlands. Just to show that people in Mariupol, for example, they're really people like us. They're not different. They had a normal life. They had normal houses. It's a port city. It's a small Rotterdam. And people are really like us.